Nora Speaks is a weekly podcast that tugs at the soul and consciousness of the Black community. With show topics such as youth empowerment, education, women's impact, and civic engagement, Nora Speaks challenges the listener to not only join the movement, but be the movement. On the show, you'll learn from insightful guests who have demonstrated capacity in these fields and more, and I'm your host, Nora Muhammad. Welcome to the show. Welcome to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast, and I am your host, Nora Muhammad. It is a privilege to be with you again for another interesting week and another interesting conversation. And I hope that you've enjoyed my guest in the previous episode, Wendy Tabor, who is the president of the Tri-County section of the National Council of Negro Women. You know, just thinking about what Wendy contributes to her community and those that are benefited by her service, I'm just really grateful that I got to speak with her and that she got to talk about the work that she does and even her journey in getting to where she is today. I think that we can all learn so much in another person's life story, and I'm grateful that Wendy took the time to share that with us on the podcast. And I hope that if you listen to it, that you are edified by it. And if you have not listened to it, I encourage you to subscribe to the Nora Speaks podcast, become a listener of the show so that you can be able to be informed, to receive different new, unique ideas, ideas that are not in the mainstream conversation. You know, I wish content like you hear on the podcast, I wish conversations like you hear on the Nora Speaks podcast were mainstream, but in the Black community, unfortunately, that's not what is marketed to us. We have an appetite for a little more salacious content, a little more exciting content, but that which is salacious and that which is exciting is not always that which is edifying. And that's what I want to provide listeners who come to the Nora Speaks podcast. I want listeners to be informed, to be inspired, to be edified. I want listeners to be able to grow from what's discussed on the show, to be able to challenge ideas that they've had or others have had. Even parents to share topics that they get from this podcast with their children. And I got a really wonderful message a few weeks ago about a mother who was using some of the topics that she hears on the podcast and engaging in dialogue with their children at the dinner table. And that's what this show is about. It is about conversation. It's about causing us to think critically or think outside of the box. Because like I said, what mainstream has for us isn't always what it is that we need. And so I wanted to be a voice among the many voices, having conversation, having dialogue with those individuals who are doing instrumental and valuable work, not people who just think great of themselves, but who think great of the people that their work and that their service impacts. And I hope that you will subscribe and share the Nora Speaks podcast with your friends and with your family. In this episode, I want to have a conversation about and again, when I say when I'm on this podcast, I'm specifically talking about the Black community. I think it's time that we have a conversation about our relationship with dysfunction and deprivation. And I'm just going to pause for a minute. When I'm talking about the Black community, many people may think I'm talking about urban communities, meaning inner cities. And I'm talking about the Black community wherever it is that we're living, wherever it is that we're going to school, wherever it is that we're working. I'm talking about Black people, Black families. Because just because I'm speaking to Black people, not all Black people live in an urban environment. Some live in a suburban environment. Some live in a rural environment. One thing we see across our communities, though, are very common issues. Whether we are in the suburbs, whether we are in a rural area, whether we are in a inner city or a more urban area, a lot of our issues really cross socioeconomic lines and barriers. We have all been shaped and formed and impacted by the suffering that our people have experienced on this continent. We all have that history, that DNA. When that awful killing of George Floyd happened, it wasn't just black people who lived in the urban area, because George Floyd lived in an urban area. It wasn't just black people in an urban area that were offended and affected. We're all one people. And so when I am referencing the black community, I don't want you to think because I live in an urban area that this message from the Nora Speaks podcast is just for you. I don't want someone who lives in a rural area to think that this is just for someone who lives in an urban area, or because someone lives in the suburbs and maybe they don't have the same issues with public safety per se, that the messages on the podcast are not for them, because it's the ideas that impact us more than anything else, right? And many of us share the same ideas about family, about media, about lifestyle. And it is these ideas that we have that negatively impact our outcomes is what I am after. That's what my goal is to challenge the ideas and to challenge some of the norms that we have. And so again, in this episode, I'm talking about our relationship with dysfunction and deprivation. And I would say that we, as black people, have a very unhealthy tie or bind to the dysfunction and the deprivation that many of us experience. And what do I mean by dysfunction? By dysfunction, I'm talking about our behavior patterns, our habits that undermine the stability of our social structures and our social systems. That's what I mean by dysfunction. These behavior patterns that we have that are just not serving us in a positive way. By deprivation, I'm talking about us as a collective being in need, being in want, regardless of the zip code that we live in. Our people have extreme need and extreme want. And unfortunately, we have accepted these conditions as normal, right? I can think of a young lady who it appeared she had moved from an urban area and she was moving and becoming my neighbor in a suburban area. And the day that she moved in, I remember coming home from work and I'm looking outside of our homes and I'm seeing debris on the ground. I'm seeing shoes outside of her house. I recall there was a kitchen chair outside in the front of her house. And I thought, well, maybe, they're still in the process of moving. Maybe she's still trying to get her thing together. Well, a week later, the shoes, the chair, the materials that should not have been outside are outside in front of her house. Now, here I am, a homeowner interested in keeping my property clean, the neighborhood clean. We know that if we keep our properties clean, neighborhoods clean, it's less likely that others would drop trash, drop litter. We know with litter comes other things like graffiti, like other vandalism. Then public safety becomes an issue. There's a trajectory. Once neighborhoods allow themselves to become dirty, there's a trajectory that follows that. because people think, well, this kind of stuff is acceptable here, right? So for me, anywhere I live, I need it to be clean because that kind of negative behavior is not acceptable anywhere that I live, anywhere my children are going to be laying their heads. And so I'm talking to the sister, and I was right. She did move to my community from an urban area. And I'm looking at the behavior. I'm looking at how she's speaking with her children. I'm looking at the trash. I can see that her house is not clean. I can see that her children are not, she's not clean. And just because the zip code changed doesn't mean that she changed her behavior. Maybe that was the norm where she was, but it's not the norm where she's coming to. However, there was not a trigger. There was no mechanism in her mind that triggered to let her know, oh, we don't do that here. Even me asking, would you like some help? I'll pick up this trash. I'll pick up that trash. And I make a show of picking up trash in my community. And at no point did she say, oh, my bad for leaving that there. Oh, do you need me to get this? Oh, let me help you pick up my trash. Nothing. Because the woman accepted that kind of dysfunctional behavior as normal. And she was instilling that same dysfunction in her children. And they were acting and living accordingly. So much so that I had to explain to them, look, you live here. You don't want to drop trash here. You don't want anybody to look at your home, my home, our community and think it's one big trash can. Trash goes in a receptacle. But at no point did the sister be triggered by her new community or even by the actions of her neighbor, right? And so what I've seen in my experience working with my people is that when someone tries to help others move beyond that point of dysfunction, oh, they have a fight on their hands because a person is so comfortable in that deprivation, in that dysfunction, because it's their norm. And so when someone, whether they themselves wants to move beyond dysfunction, or if someone comes into their circumstance and say, hey, look, we can help this be better. There's things that we can do. We can make this better, right? We say, oh, that person's acting uppity, right? Or we say silly things like, oh, they're acting white, right? Or they want us to act white, as if white people have some monopoly on function, on class, on cleanliness. This has nothing to do with a white person. Black woman, I'm saying to you, you deserve to be in cleanliness. You deserve to be functional. You deserve to live in a better environment. But because many of us don't have a relationship, because we haven't seen it coming up, we hold on to those norms that we've had as a child. So some examples of our dysfunction, and again, dysfunction refers to some of these behavior patterns that we have that hamper the stability of our social systems. Here's some examples of our dysfunction as a Black community. Unwed births. This has become all too common. Absentee parents. Substance abuse. And drunk driving. It has amazed me over the years to see how accepting we are of people who are intoxicated behind the wheel. I'm talking about, the old aunts or the old uncles or the friends or the nieces or the cousins. And like, wait, that person just drove here and they're high. Like they could hurt themselves or somebody. But we have just allowed it to become so normalized, right? And then God forbid we say anything about it. Now we're judgmental. Well, I say something that is detrimental to our community, to our people, we have a right to say something. Some of the deprivation that I see within our community, definitely educationally, definitely with economics. We are surely deprived of public safety. And many, many, many people are deprived of stability at home. I've known folks who, in a month's time, they've lived in a different place. And in 12 months' time, they may have had 6 different homes. But we have become comfortable with this. And I say that we have to become uncomfortable. We have to stop allowing ourselves to be relegated to this poor living, to these poor conditions. We deserve better, but better is not going to come to us from someone else. We have to take steps and take action. So I think about the community that I live in Camden, New Jersey. And thankfully, the neighborhood that I'm in, we care about what our neighborhood looks like. We care about who's walking through our neighborhood. We care a great deal. All neighborhoods are not the same, and everyone doesn't have that same mindset. So while we have my neighbors, we get together and we plan how we're going to help our community stay clean, how we're going to keep our community safe. We strategize, we meet, we communicate. Many of us don't care that there's trash outside of our homes. Many of us don't care that there's windows in buildings near us that have the glass broken out, that have the boards that were nailed up to keep people out. We don't care that people are going in and out. We don't care about the decay that is occurring around us. And when someone, organizations, groups, corporations, see our communities neglected in horrible, horrible shape, and they have a vision and they say, we can do something with this. We can turn this around. Then they get accused of coming in and gentrifying communities. Now, I don't agree with disenfranchising residents who have lived in a neighborhood, in a community for their whole lives and pricing them out. I don't agree with that. However, I am not against capital improvements. We get so comfortable with our neighborhoods in the shape that they're in. And this can go for rural and this can go for urban, because I've seen it both, and I've seen suburban. If we have a poor mindset, that mindset travels. As I explained in that example with my neighbor, her mindset traveled and just was horrible. It was horrible for me as a neighbor. It was horrible. Not just the people that she would have in and out. She'd have guests standing outside our properties and throw trash on the ground. And I would go out in front of all of them and pick up the trash because I don't live like that. And I want to discourage that kind of behavior. I also don't want to live in a community and we just watch buildings just fall into dilapidation and we do nothing about it. Are we going to put our nickels and dimes, our dollars, and save and acquire these properties? Or are we just going to just get comfortable walking past them? They have litter all over the lot. The glass is broken out. There's debris like mattresses outside of these properties, or old couches or old refrigerator. We're just going to walk past this, drive past this, and just be okay that our communities are in such disrepair, and be angry when corporations say there's something that we can do here. And again, I do not agree with pricing people out of communities, but I also don't want to live in a cesspool. And I refuse to live in a cesspool, and we should all refuse to live in a cesspool. And there's so much that we can do with little. But because we have become accustomed, we say that's just how it is. No, that's just how we allow it to be. And so when we recognize that we are actively making a decision to allow our communities to fall into disrepair, to be in disrepair, when we're confronted with the reality that we've made a decision to allow it to be like that, perhaps we can act a little differently. Maybe confronting oneself will cause a different kind of action. But we act as if we're powerless, and we're not. And we have to end this awful relationship that we have with this dysfunction and deprivation, where we wish for public safety. We're afraid to go out. We're afraid to drive through the community because of carjacking. We're afraid, our elders are, to go out and sit outside because of what may happen. No one should live like that. And we shouldn't allow it. We shouldn't permit it. But there has to be a mind shift change for any of this, for us to have a hope of any of this. And so, I recall years ago, it was MLK Day of Service. It was about 2 or 3 years ago. And I saw groups of young white boys and girls, high school or college students, cleaning up in Camden, New Jersey. They came in for their MLK Day of Service, getting credits for school probably, and they were cleaning up our community. And it just made me feel so bad that others would look and see the trash and think to come in on their day of service to serve us when we could be serving ourselves. MLK Day of Service or not, we don't need someone to come in and clean up the trash that we drop on the ground. I mean, that to me, that is humiliating. So as I'm driving down the street, I see these young Caucasians cleaning up. And then the next block, I see a middle-aged black man throwing trash on the ground. And it was just such a slap in the face. And we have to do better. Brothers and sisters, we have to do better. We should not allow ourselves to live like this. This shows that we have no love, we have no self-respect, and we have no dignity. And so I know that some of this, as I said, is just ingrained because we didn't know growing up. We didn't notice. Sometimes you don't notice mess. You don't notice trash because you're in it so much. And so I'll use an example of someone who lives with cats, right? A cat lady. She doesn't know that her house stinks. She doesn't know that her house has a powerful, pungent smell to it. And so there's something called olfactory fatigue. Olfactory refers to our sense of smell. And fatigue means that once you smell something, after a while, that smell becomes faint, right? So you could put on cologne or perfume, and in the late afternoon, someone say, "Oh, you smell so good." And you say, "Oh, I forgot to even put it on. I don't smell it anymore," right? Olfactory fatigue. Well, the cat lady has olfactory fatigue. She does not know that her house stinks, that her house has a stench, right? And then after we're there for 10 or 15 minutes, 20 minutes, the smell becomes faint to us as well. So while the cat lady is in her nasty, stinky house, someone comes and says, "I can help you clean." And she says, "What are you talking about? My house doesn't need to be cleaned," because she can't smell it, right? After we're there, we immerse ourselves, we can't smell it. So I get that after a while, things just become part of a culture, part of a norm, but we need new norms, and we have to force some things. And that can just be by way of our own actions. We should not relegate ourselves to broken down communities and disrepair. And I've heard people who call themselves activists working against improvements in this city and in other cities with no alternative. It's not like they say, "Well, we don't want you to come in and make these capital improvements because we're going to." No, they just don't want groups coming in and making improvements. And I really don't understand that kind of activism. I don't understand that kind of activity where we are against efforts at improving our communities. And then we're not going to make any changes ourselves. It's really shameful, and we deserve better. boy, it's like someone that's been broken down and abused. And when someone says, you deserve better, they just can't hear it. They can't see it for themselves. They no longer think that that's a reality that they should enjoy. So I'm saying to you who's listening to this podcast, we deserve better than the dysfunction, to the deprivation, to the disrepair that we see around us in our communities, regardless of our zip codes. We deserve better. And because we deserve better, we have to start doing better. And I encourage you to talk to your circle, those who are within your influence, and let them know that we deserve better. Curtains belong on windows, not bed sheets. When you go outside your house and there's trash, just pick it up and put it in the receptacle. Put it in the trash can. Simple things. If you have trash in your pocket, hold it until you get to a trash can. What is this acceptance with living next to a lot that's full of trash? Now, it may not be your lot, but you don't want to live next to garbage, next to trash. So we have to really think about what we deserve and what we're entitled to. I think about homeowners associations and how rigid and strict they are. Yeah, because they know people. They know that people will allow their properties to become dilapidated or in disrepair. And so there's a penalty for that, right? We shouldn't have to be penalized into making sure that we take care of our properties, our homes. We should do it because we know that we're worth it. So this is going to require a major shift on our part in our thinking and in our actions. I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Become a subscriber. Let others know about Nora Speaks, and make sure you leave me a comment. Let me know what you think about this conversation. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts. Until next time, stay in peace. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Be on the lookout for a new episode coming at you fresh next week. And as always, if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, visit my website, NoraMuhammad.com. Or if you have a listener question, email me at info@noraspeaks.com. You can also follow the Nora Speaks podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Nora Speaks Podcast. I'll be sure to include links in the show notes. If this show has value to you, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share it with family and friends. And be sure to check out previous episodes. And remember, don't just join the movement, be the movement. Stay in peace.